Hello, everyone. This is my first Switch meeting, and it's been wonderful to meet different people and talk to old acquaintances again. So it's great to be here. But I am a curator for China and Korea at the Swedish National Museums of World Culture, but also a director of the Museum of Far Eastern Antiquities. My colleague Lotten is a curator for globalization, but also the director of the Museum of Ethnography. And the reason I mention these titles is because it gives you an idea of the complexity of our organization, very similar to what's the organization in Holland over here. But I guess I have to confess first that we do not have a collections policy. And I think possibly one of the main reasons could be for the past 10 years we've been going through some type of reorganization or change in some way or other. So it's quite easy to put something like collections policies as of secondary importance. Just to give you an idea of some of the guidelines, and if you read between the lines, the guidelines just kind of make it safe acquisitions in the sense that we should be active in the acquisitions and stress restraint. We should acquire according to our aims, purposes, and area of responsibility within the agency, which essentially we're supposed to present world culture, so that doesn't really help us narrow down what we're supposed to collect or not. Of course, the ethical aspect is also stressed. That makes sure whatever we're sessioning, it's considered to be ethical. But just to give you an idea of, why it's so difficult for us to have one accession policy for 4 different museums, we have, and just to give you a bit of a background for the museums, we have the Museum of Far Eastern Antiquities. It was founded in 1926. Mainly on archaeological collections of Johan Gunnar Andersen. And in 1959, the East and South Asian art collections of the National Gallery were merged with the Museum of Far Eastern Antiquities. And it historically and traditionally has had very much of an art historical focus until, I would say, relatively recently. There's the Museum of Mediterranean and Near Eastern Antiquities, which was founded in 1954 on the Old Egyptian Museum, or the collections of the Old Egyptian Museum, as well as archaeological collections from the Swedish Cyprus expedition that was between 1927 and 1931. And there were additional collections added in 1957 also from the Museum of National Antiquities and the National Gallery. Let me go ahead to the Museum of Ethnography. Began as an ethnographic department of the Museum of Natural History in 1900, based on the ethnographical collections of the Royal Academy of Sciences, 1739, as well as various academic societies and early scientific excavations. Also large archaeological collections, mostly from the Americas. But, one of the more celebrated collections there would be the Sven Hedin collection, I would say. And Lotten, feel free to jump in if I miss something or if you want to comment. So this, very ethnographic approach. We had, the other museums were very art historical, and then there's also very kind of archaeological approach as well for for instance, the Mediterranean Museum. And we also have the newest museum, which is the Museum of World Culture in the southern city of Gothenburg. And this acquired the collections of the old Museum of Gothenburg, so a lot of collections from the Americas. And this was about 10 years ago. When was it started? Museums of World Culture? 2004. Okay, yeah. So 10, 11, yeah. So, and this was started because originally there were plans of moving the three museums to Gothenburg. There was such an outcry in Stockholm that they decided, okay, we'll keep the three museums in Stockholm, but build a new museum in Gothenburg as kind of a compromise. And this museum has a very different philosophy and even different organization as the three museums in Stockholm. As of yet, they have no permanent displays of collections. So they have a lot of temporary exhibitions as well as a lot of activities that cater to various groups. So you can imagine we have four museums with different philosophies and very different histories with the collections. On the one hand, we're asked, the collections are all now one collection, and we're kind of asked to divorce ourselves from the histories of the collections. But that's very difficult to do because we are working with the collections that actually reflect the history of the institution. So it's a bit difficult to know, how we should proceed, because then if we're the Museums of World Culture, we present world culture, we have, certain aspects that are art historical, certain aspects that are ethnological, certain aspects that are archaeological. How do you have one overarching collections policy? So Lotte and I started thinking, well, maybe the way to go is actually to collect by themes, have an active collections policy by theme. And I think some of these the museums that we heard about has also gone with this type of idea. So some of these themes could include diaspora communities, and of course to also have relevant themes too up to today. It could be diaspora religions, diaspora community, it could be craft and identity, environmental issues. So if we collect by themes, we can incorporate the art historical aspect, we can incorporate ethnology, and maybe review the archaeological material and present them in a different way as well through the collecting of contemporary relevant social issues. And certainly we should maybe become more active in our collecting rather than just saying yes or no when people offer objects. And also implement co-collecting, because right now how it works is the individual curators will make a suggestion, and it's more or less rubber stamped by the general director, because even the collecting is obviously centralized as well now. So to include co-collecting in this policy, as well as rather than looking for objects that with the more traditional idea of this object represents this culture, that culture, but to look for hybrid objects, or not just object stories, photographs, anything that talks about hybridity and how many factors come into play in the world today. So I guess this has been a very good kind of thinking process for us and try to present maybe one unified collections policy that would fit the four different museums.